Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of 3 Wide. I'm your host, Radney Crawford. In today's episode, we're going to be previewing the upcoming 2025 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. We'll be taking a look at the drivers who are on the move with their new teams, as well as the drivers to watch, our Championship 4 favorites, and some drivers who may be on the hot seat going into this season. But before we get into all that, let's hear a word from our presenting sponsor, Hunt to Harvest. Hunt to Harvest continues to be a great supporter of this show and a brand that I am proud to represent. You too can represent them by going to hunttoharvest.com and upgrading your hunting apparel. They are fully stocked in their shirts where you can find designs for all different types of hunting. Whether it be deer, duck, or elk, Hunt to Harvest has a shirt for you. They also still have a good selection of rope and 7-panel hats, plus performance polos crafted to keep you cool and dry in any environment. When you're ready to check out, be sure to use the promo code RADNEY18923 for even more savings. And that's RADNEY 18923 at hunttoharvest.com. Now, starting off with the 2025 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season, you have a lot of holes to fill in this playoff field. There's a lot of changeover in this series. Taylor Gray, Nick Sanchez, Christian Eckes, Daniel Dye, they have all left for the NASCAR Xfinity Series this upcoming season, and that opens up 4 playoff spots from last year. You will still have your expected favorites like Corey Heim, defending champion Ty Majeski, Ben Rhodes, and even Grant Enfinger. But outside of that, who will step up and become contenders themselves? My top pick for that is Rajah Caruth. He had a breakout year with Spire Motorsports last season, winning early in the year at Las Vegas, ultimately finishing 7th in points. Early on, Rajah looked like a guy that could make it to the Championship 4, and I believe that improvement will continue in 2025 as he goes into his second season with Spire Motorsports. Then you have Tyler Ankrum. While he didn't win last year in his first season with BMR, he still had a strong start and finished to last season. Early on, like Rajah, he looked like a guy that was going to be a favorite to watch in the playoffs, and I believe that will continue again in 2025, and he will also win multiple races this upcoming year. Now, you do have dark horses like Lane Riggs, who is a strong short track racer. He won the first 2 playoff races of the season last year, but he needs to get a grip on the 1.5-mile tracks. Luckily for him, short tracks are pretty heavy on the first part of the schedule with tracks like Martinsville and Bristol, so he has a chance early on to lock himself in the playoff field and then focus on improving those 1.5 miles before the playoff starts. The big wrinkle for 2025 in the Truck Series is the returns of former regular drivers in the Truck Series, Chandler Smith and Daniel Hemrick. They are racing for 2 of the top 3 teams in this series, Hemrick with BMR taking over Christian Eckes' ride, and Chandler Smith going into a second Front Row Motorsports truck. And when you have veterans like this coming back to the Craftsman Truck Series, it normally goes one of 2 ways. They can take over the series like we saw in the early mid 2000s when Cup and Xfinity Series regulars were coming down like Johnny Benson, Johnny Sauter, Mike Skinner returning to the Truck Series, Todd Bodine. It could very well work out like that, or they will have a return season like we saw with Ty Dillon last year, and they're complete non-factors in the playoff field. I don't see that scenario being the case given who these 2 drivers are and the teams they're driving for. Chandler Smith was a championship contender in both the Xfinity and the Truck Series, and he's hopping back into a top-notch ride like he had when he was in the Truck Series with Kyle Busch Motorsports. And the same for Daniel Hemrick. He's coming in with a lot more experience and knowledge of this series after starting out with Brad Keselowski racing when he first joined the Craftsman Truck Series years ago. Now he's back with BMR, who is coming off a championship win with Christian Eckes. And joining Hemrick and Chandler Smith as new drivers in the Truck Series for this season are rookies Gio Ruggiero, Tony Breidinger, Christian Rose, along with Connor Mosack, who after several part-time starts finally gets his first full-time shot in a national series. For Ruggiero, he is 18 years old, and he's coming off a 3rd-place finish in the ARCA East Series last year with a win at Five Flags Speedway in Pensacola. He is also a Winchester 400 winner and a Southern Super Series and CRA Super Series champion. So he's a very talented short-track racer and will be someone to keep an eye on as an upset possibility. Then you have Tony Breidinger, who is the next female prospect with a lot of potential. She's a former USAC Midgets champion. She finished 4th in the ARCA Series standing last season. Both Breidinger and Ruggiero are joining Tricon and will benefit being a part of a team that's not only the flagship Toyota team, but also being teammates with a championship contender like Corey Heim. Then there's Christian Rose, who moves from full-time ARCA, where he had back-to-back top 5 points finishes, to Nice Motorsports in the Craftsman Truck Series. He is 29 years old, so his ceiling as far as moving up in the ranks will be limited, possibly, depending how he performs this upcoming year. But I think he will fit in well at Nice with fellow drivers Matt Mills, Bailey Curry, Caden Honeycutt, guys who have talent and have kind of flown under the radar, but finally found themselves in a solid spot with Nice Motorsports. As for Connor Mosack, this is my pick for Rookie of the Year. He has the most experience in the top levels of NASCAR of these rookie drivers, with 28 Xfinity Series starts and 11 Truck Series starts. He made starts last year for Spire Motorsports in Nice with one top five, third place finish at Homestead, and four top tens. Add that experience in with a team like BMR, and Mosack should have a pretty successful 2025 season. Now, for my final four predictions on who makes that field, I believe we have a mixture of new faces, but also, as I said earlier, our regular contenders like Corey Heim and Ty Majeski. I believe they will make it into the field, especially as strong as Majeski is in the second half of the season. I also believe that Rajah Caruth will join them for a championship battle, as well as returning driver Daniel Hemrick. For the reason I put him over Chandler Smith, it's kind of the unknown. You have Chandler going into a second Front Row Motorsports truck. How will that expansion affect the team as a whole? Will they be as strong as they have in years past? I also believe that this will be the last year for Matt Crafton as a full-time competitor in this series. He will be 49 years old by the halfway point of the season. He has not won a race since 2020, and his average finish has been on the decline since 2019. Now, with that being said, with his sponsorship with Menards, they've been a backer behind him throughout his career. He pretty much probably has it set up where he can call it a day whenever he wants to, and he's earned that. I believe when he retires, he should go down as one of the top drivers in the Craftsman Truck Series history. He belongs in the same talk as drivers like Jack Sprague, Mike Skinner, Ted Musgrave, Todd Bodine, Johnny Benson. He's a multi-time champion down there, and I believe should be a Hall of Famer when it's all said and done. Now, when I look through this field, I also can see a rivalry start forming, possibly, mainly between Chandler Smith and Corey Heim. These two are very similar in tempers and aggression. You have both drivers wanting to progress throughout their careers. Chandler Smith has made it to the Xfinity Series where he proved he can go out and win a championship, but now he has to start back over in the Truck Series. He is going to be hungry to go out and immediately make a name for himself and get on other teams' radars. Same for Corey Heim. This will be another year for him. I don't want to say stuck in the Truck Series, but he's a driver who's probably ready to make that move to the next level. He just hasn't been presented with that opportunity yet. And I believe at some point, these two drivers' paths are going to cross. And with the way they drive, as aggressive as they are, this is going to be the rivalry to watch for in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. As for our hot seat drivers, I've really mainly only got one, and that is Jake Garcia in the Craftsman Truck Series. He had a sophomore slump last year in his first year with ThorSport. His average finish was down nearly 5 spots. He only had 2 top 10s throughout the season compared to 3 top 5s and 9 top 10s in his rookie year. And when you're driving, make a move like Jake did going to ThorSport, which is a team that's used to having at least 2 cars or 2 trucks in the championship 4. There are expectations. Now, history has shown us with ThorSport that while they'll have 2 or 3 of their trucks running up front, contending for wins, making runs through the playoffs, that 4th truck always seems to kind of fall behind and is an afterthought. And unfortunately, this past year, it was Jake Garcia. That could change this year, especially now that he has a full year under his belt and he kind of knows what to expect with this team and who he has around him. But he will be a driver to watch throughout this season. If he can't step it up and perform back to his rookie season levels and maybe even get a victory here and there, I believe it will be a rough ending to the season for Jake Garcia. And while the Craftsman Truck Series will be going through their own identity change with so many young drivers coming in as well as veterans returning back to that series, they're not going to have quite the landscape shake in the identity as far as the Xfinity Series goes for 2025. There was a lot of moving around going on in the series. You have Joe Gibbs Racing. They will have a completely different driver lineup, as well as Haas now that Tony Stewart is gone. Junior Motorsports is now loaded up on top prospects, and teams like AM Racing, Alpha Prime, Colleague, and Big Machine, they're all hitting the reset button with their driver lineups. For Joe Gibbs Racing, they now have a lineup consisting of Taylor Gray, William Sawalich, a returning Brandon Jones, and the 19 car, which will again have a multi-driver lineup. This is the team with the biggest question mark. How will How will Taylor Gray and William Sawalich perform in their debut full-time season for the Xfinity Series? Then you have Brandon Jones, who's coming off his worst 2 seasons of his career after originally leaving Joe Gibbs Racing for Junior Motorsports. Of this group, I believe Taylor Gray has the most potential. We saw him have a breakout year last year in the Truck Series. While he didn't win, he still had a solid season. We saw him get right to the edge of making it to that championship 4 race before all that happened at Martinsville between him and Christian Eckes. So I think Taylor Gray of that group will be the surprise performer. Meanwhile, Haas looks to be the strongest team with a new driver lineup, adding Sheldon Creed and Sam Mayer. Sheldon is coming off his best season at Joe Gibbs Racing, where he had his highest career average finish. He had so many second-place finishes, still looking for that first career win. Meanwhile, Sam Mayer had a bit of a worse season in 2024 compared to 2023, but he did still go out and win 3 races and is still one of the top young drivers in this sport. And I could be wrong, but I think it will take Sam Mayer a little bit longer to adapt to this new team than it will Sheldon Creed. Creed has done this a few times before, whether it was in the Truck Series or the Xfinity Series, moving to a new team, and each time he's stepped up to the plate and he's performed well pretty much from the get-go. So I do think this is the year Sheldon finally breaks through that glass ceiling and visits victory lane and becomes more of a championship contender than before. And I still think Sam Mayer wins. I still believe he makes the playoffs. I just think it takes him a little bit longer before we see him running up front more consistently. As for the team Sam Mayer just left, Junior Motorsports, they boast the most potential with their lineup, adding Carson Kvapil and Connor Zilisch to their roster. Connor Zilisch won in his debut race with Junior Motorsports at Watkins Glen last year, and he also finished 4th at both Phoenix and Kansas in 4 starts last year. Carson Kvapil, he also impressed with his part-time starts with 3 top 5s, including a second-place finish at Dover. And between those two, Zilisch is going to be the one to get the headlines, probably more eyeballs on him, because he is hyped as that next great prospect. And not saying it's false hype. He showed last year he very well deserves it. And I think he will be on the fast track to the Cup Series. But don't let Carson Kvapil fool you. He is more Justin Allgaier-like, in my opinion. He's more consistent. He's, I think, going to be better at keeping the car out of trouble and maximizing the most out of his day. Patience, to me, is one of his greatest attributes. He doesn't seem to push the envelope, even for a rookie last year, in spots where he could have went out, been more aggressive and won races. He was more methodical about it, and I think that will serve him better in the long run with this team. Defending champ Justin Allgaier is also back with the team, and as I just announced, he is actually going to make the first start for Junior Motorsports in the Cup Series at the Daytona 500. So it's already starting to be a big year for Justin Allgaier coming off his first career championship. Then you have Sammy Smith, who will need a big season so he doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And we'll have more on Sammy here shortly before we get off the Xfinity Series. Some other teams making moves, as I mentioned before, AM Racing. After a very disappointing year last year with Hailie Deegan, where you had a lot of hype around this team, around her, thinking that they were going to grow into more of a contender in the series. Instead, it was a big letdown. Now they have Harrison Burton, and patience is going to be key with this team and young driver. As I said, it was so disappointing last year, especially coming off a solid season in 2023 with Brett Moffitt. And now for AM Racing, the key is you don't want to pull the trigger too bad on thinking you need to get a new driver. Harrison is a former Xfinity winner. He drove for Joe Gibbs Racing, who's the top team in the series. So it may be a bit of an adjustment and a struggle now going to a team like AM Racing, who isn't exactly one of the top teams in the series and even in their own manufacturer. But maybe with the experience Harrison gained at the Wood Brothers, where basically outside of his Daytona win, it was a forgettable experience in the Cup Series for Harrison. But maybe he took something from that and can apply it to being with AM Racing to turn it more into a positive. And I think the biggest thing that this team can do to help themselves and Harrison Burton is getting a second part-time car, throwing in a veteran, maybe like Brett Moffitt, who has experience with this team, who knows a little bit more of the ins and outs about it. And we've seen Moffitt go out and he can maximize each team. As I mentioned, I believe in last week's episode, he's a driver who you look at how a team performed when he was there and then performed after he left. He's a guy who can lift teams up and get the most out of their equipment. So that would be a huge plus if they were able to do that. Then you have Alpha Prime bringing over Parker Retzlaff from Jordan Anderson Racing after he left that team at the end of last year. And for Retzlaff, I'm still pretty high on him as a driver in the sport. While he may not be looked at as a top prospect for the Cup Series, I do believe Parker can be a solid Xfinity Series driver. Now, this past year, he wasn't as consistent as he was in 2023, but he did get 2 career poles. He led more laps than he did in his rookie year and was able to gain 1 more top 5 than the year before as well. The thing with Retzloff going to this team is, again, consistency. That's what a problem is with a lot of these drivers making moves. And for Alpha Prime and Parker Retzloff, this could be a pretty good matchup. You got Alpha Prime wanting to take that next step. They look at a team like Big Machine Racing, and they want to be at their level. They want to get up there and they want to contend for wins. And Parker could be a perfect driver to build around and get you to that point. And speaking of Big Machine Racing, they now have Nick Sanchez driving for them in 2025, with Parker Kligerman leaving, announcing he is done full-time racing. And Sanchez, in my opinion, is the perfect pick to fill that seat after coming off a solid sophomore season in the Truck Series where he won 2 races. And Big Machine Racing, they are a team that's on the rise, especially over the past couple of years with Parker Kligerman driving for them. This team's only won 1 race with Tyler Reddick at Texas back in 2022, but they have been on the rise at a pretty significant rate given how they started just back in 2021. And I think Sanchez will be a driver that can help get them to that next level, get them running up front just as much as Parker, and hopefully the young driver can get some victories with this team. And of all the Xfinity Series silly season moves that happened, our Motorsports, in my opinion, has to be the biggest downgrade this upcoming season, going from Anthony Alfredo to Chris Wright. This is nothing personal against Chris Wright, but in 47 Truck Series starts, he only has 12 finishes inside the top 20, and only 2 finishes in the top 20 in 16 Xfinity races. Trading that for Anthony Alfredo, who gave this team their highest points finish and brought them more consistency next to Brett Moffitt, is a bit of a disappointment. I don't know the details if sponsorship was a key, but Wright is fully funded. It just feels like there could have been a better option out there to replace Anthony Alfredo. And one more move that's kind of snuck by here, especially at the start of 2025, is Matt DiBenedetto getting announced full-time for Viking Motorsports this upcoming season. Matt had some starts at the end of last year with this team and performed pretty well. And I think that will continue in 2025. We always see, especially in the Xfinity Series, kind of these surprise teams that are in a competitive spot for points when it comes to the last few spots in their playoffs. And I think Viking Motorsports and Matt DiBenedetto could be that team. Matt and Brett Moffitt have a lot in common, and I tie them in because I just talked about our Motorsports. When you look at Brett Moffitt and how our Motorsports performed with Moffitt there and how they performed after, you see the difference. And the same can be said about Moffitt stops at AM Racing. And that's the same is true with Matt DiBenedetto. Look at his runs with the Wood Brothers and his runs with Rackley in the Truck Series. While they may not be eye-popping stats and it may not be championship-level winning statistics, it's still an improvement over what they're running now. And I think Viking Motorsports hit on a good driver that can make them stronger than maybe they really are and have them up front more often than not. And before I get into some bold predictions for the upcoming season for the Xfinity Series, let's look at one main driver who I see on the hot seat for 2025. This is a guy I think will need a big year to keep his ride and continue his progression to the Cup Series. That is Sammy Smith. I mentioned Sammy a little bit earlier and in last week's episode and how he will need to step up this season to keep up with his new teammates Connor Zilisch and Carson Quaffle to avoid getting lost in the shuffle. Sammy Smith was in the position of those 2 drivers being looked at as a top prospect in the sport, but after 2 so-so seasons in the Xfinity Series, he finds himself in a delicate spot. Sammy has won 1 race in both his seasons so far, and he does have a pretty good number of top 5s and top 10s in his career. The problem is consistency. Last year especially, if he wasn't running in the top 5 or the top 10, he was normally found outside the top 20 in the finishing order. Of the 17 races where he did not get a top 10, 11 of them were outside of the top 20. And while consistency may not be a top priority in today's playoff format of the sport, it should still be a goal for each driver. If Sammy could maximize the races where he's outside the top 10s and simply get more top 15 or top 20 finishes, he could easily be a championship Ford driver. Fortunately for Sammy, he does have solid backing from Pilot and TMC, and in today's NASCAR, that is a major factor for your career, and it can buy you more time. Unfortunately for Sammy, he is now joined by 2 of the top prospects in this sport, as his teammates, and all eyes are going to be on them. And you also have Corey Day, who just signed a contract with Hendrick Motorsports, and he'll be making several part-time starts this year across multiple series. So if Sammy struggles and Corey impresses enough this year with his part-time starts, we could see that Hendrick-backed driver, Corey Day, get the nod over Sammy Smith. And wrapping up the Xfinity Series with some bold predictions, I believe Eckes gets Colleague back on track and wins multiple races, but he does fall just short of the championship 4. Then you also have his teammate Josh Williams. I think Josh gets a win this year, most likely on a super speedway, especially with this team's history on the super speedways back when it was AJ Allmendinger, Ross Chastain, Jeb Burton. I think it gets back to that point with now Christian Eckes, Josh Williams, and Daniel Dye. All 4 junior motorsports drivers make the playoffs, with Connor Zilisch getting the most wins, but I think it's Carson Kvapil who surprises everybody and gets further ahead in the playoffs than Connor Zilisch. It will be a down year for Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025, but you will have Taylor Gray show the most promise, and I believe he will be the only full-time driver for Joe Gibbs Racing to get into victory lane. Now, you do have Ryan Truex, who's just announced as their full-time backup driver, but I believe he comes back and gets some part-time starts, and he also wins in this series for the 3rd year in a row. My final 4 predictions are Sheldon Creed, Austin Hill, Jesse Love, and Justin Allgaier making it to Phoenix. Now, Austin Hill, we know how good he is on the super speedways. He's one of the top guys in this series. He's strong on 1.5 miles, and while he may not have many wins, if he can get it together this year and win more on those 1.5 miles, take advantage of that, I think he will be a top pick for the championship this season, especially if we get to a late restart. We know how aggressive Austin Hill is willing to be. His teammate Jesse Love had a breakout rookie season, especially over the last half of the year, and I think that builds over into 2025. He has a strong sophomore season. He wins multiple races and will be a surprise championship 4 driver. And that'll wrap up today's episode of 3 Wide. As always, thank y'all for joining me and listening along. If you haven't done it already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast from. You can also find me on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe there, as it won't be too much longer. We'll be doing our Drivers to Watch shorts to kick off the season at Daytona. Also, we still have to preview the 2025 Cup Series season, and that will be coming over the next couple of weeks. But I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week, and we will see y'all next time here on 3 Wide.